Okay, so I read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. This is the 50th anniversary edition of this work, and it's the fourth edition, so this is somewhat of a modern classic. Anyway, it was written in 1962. Thomas Kuhn he got his BS, MS, and PhD in physics from Harvard, and he was a history of science and philosophy of science professor at MIT, among other places. Basically, Kuhn's writing to challenge the typical conception of how the history of science develops. And so most people typically think of science as being like, if this is a timeline of the world, then science develops sort of by a linear accumulation of knowledge over the course of time. And so Kuhn challenges that and says, no, that is not the case. That is not the way that scientific knowledge progresses, that it's not in a linear cumulative kind of process. So he gives three main contentions to support this argument. And so, first of all, about this book, just a few things about it. Number one, science is not my field, and there is a lot of science in this book, so a lot of this is over my head. But also, it's written in a way that is not terribly easy to summarize. But I have distilled it down to, I think, what are his key contentions. So the first contention is that the scientific community is not one uniformly progressive community, but is actually a collective of several historical communities. How many of you guys have heard of paradigms? Yeah, we've talked about paradigms just today. And so anyways, these communities to which the scientists adhere are paradigms. And Kuhn kind of defines a paradigm as basically the whole of techniques, patents, and values shared by the adherents of a scientific community. It's the common model to which the community adheres, and it sets the foundation, framework, and textbook level understanding for all of the work that the scientists do, which he calls the work of natural science. Basically, examples of paradigms would be like Newton's Physica, Einstein's theory of relativity, an older one be Aristotle's, Newton's Principia, Aristotle's Physica. So anyway, his second contention then, well, let me tell you this quickly. So he says basically that with these paradigms that the paradigms develop scientific communities under them, and then within these communities they establish research traditions and rules that govern the way that they do their work. And then these traditions turn back around and kind of dictate the culture for the community, and they dictate what would be considered real science and what would be the appropriate way to perform science, as well as like the tools that are used to do science and the methods and applications for science. So then his second contention is that the prominent scientific paradigm changes in response to the discovery of anomalies that the paradigm can't solve for. So in the process of doing natural science and trying to further develop out the theory and confirm the theory of the paradigm, science runs across anomalies which the theory can't solve for. And when the theory can't solve for the problems, then crisis arises. And so when a theory falls into crisis, it can basically respond in one of three ways. The paradigm either continues to work on these anomalies until it proves that it can actually handle the crisis. The second would be that the crisis resists even new approaches, and it can't be solved. And so those anomalies would be set aside for later research. They're kind of just accepted as we don't know what to do with those. And then the third response that a paradigm would have to a crisis is that a new paradigm would instead emerge that better solves for those anomalies, and then that new paradigm would battle against the established paradigm in order to take prominence as the new scientific paradigm. So his third contention then is that progress in scientific knowledge includes a series of paradigm revolutions in which paradigms battle, are toppled and deconstructed to be replaced by a new paradigm theory. And so he likens this to political revolutions. Basically, he says that political revolutions aim to challenge or aim to change political institutions in ways that those institutions themselves prohibit, and that crisis attenuates the role of political institutions. And as the crisis deepens, many individuals commit themselves to new institutional frameworks, seeking, the society is divided into competing camps and parties, and one seeking to defend the old institutional constellation and others seeking to institute some new one. So basically what he's saying then is that rather than science working this way in one paradigm where where experiments discover new information and knowledge that contributes to the further articulation of this paradigm,
which he calls normal science.
Yeah, normal science.
Day in, day out.
What actually happens is that science operates in paradigms. So there's this framework for how the science works. And then all of normal science takes place within this framework. And what happens is whenever you run into these anomalies, then you have a new paradigm that comes in, and it kind of does battle with, it can solve for these anomalies, and then it kind of does battle to displace the old paradigm. And so what you get is this new, you get chaos in here where there's this kind of battle, and then it kind of wipes out this old paradigm, and this new paradigm is established as the new way of doing science. And so then what this all leads to is his conclusion that competing paradigms are not reconcilable because they operate in divergent frameworks with different ways of accounting for reality. So each new paradigm brings reconstruction. He says, hold on just a second. He says that a new paradigm is a reconstruction from new fundamentals that changes some of the field's most elementary theoretical generalizations, methods, and applications. So basically, it's a complete reinterpretation of the way that we interpret what the world is and how it works. And so what this demonstrates to us is that the notion that science develops in a contiguous linear fashion is actually an illusion. It does not develop that way. And that also the notion that science is solely based on rational empiricism is false. Because what happens is whenever these paradigms do battle and a new paradigm emerges, scientists have to choose between which paradigm they're going to embrace. And so they're radically different interpretations of what is going on, or of ways of interpreting. So what you have then is you have the old establishment that falls into crisis, and then you have kind of anomalies in here, and you have a new movement that kind of emerges to solve for it, and then science kind of falls into chaos. And then what happens is the new establishment emerges, and it basically displaces this old establishment. And so they're not reconcilable. And so what that means then is that these guys are committed to their paradigm because it's the way that they know how to do science. It's the framework in which that they were trained. And if they wanted to do science in the way of the new paradigm, they would have to be completely re-educated. They'd have to learn a whole new way of thinking and new tools and new applications and all these kinds of things. And so these guys are committed to their paradigm. These guys are committed to solving those anomalies that they ran across. And they believe, so the other thing that Kuhn says is that no paradigm can solve for every anomaly. Every paradigm has anomalies. And so basically which paradigm you choose in science becomes a value judgment between which anomalies you're willing to live with. And so that's where it becomes not so much a rational, objective, linear build-out, but it becomes an actual subjective value judgment about which paradigm that you're going to embrace. So, you say, why is this relevant to culture? Well, at the time of writing, the thesis was revolutionary. He termed the idiom paradigm shift, and this was a huge wake-up call to the Western world as to how science works and how it develops. You say, well, why is it relevant to Christ, truth, and culture? Well, I'll give you 7 reasons quickly. First, science has a goal of cornering the market on truth. And similarly, our culture is increasingly looking to science to be the sole arbiter of truth. We live in a culture of increasing scientism, which is basically looking to science as the foundation for your worldview. And second, what science teaches holds influence on how our culture interprets everything. And that includes not just how you observe empirical data, but your beliefs and your values and your ethics, all different kinds of things. Third, the present paradigm that we're living in right now seeks to leverage its work to push philosophical naturalism and to secularize society. Fourth, if people are going to build their beliefs on the foundation of science, they should really understand how science works, and I would suggest to you that most people in our culture don't know how science really works and how it develops. Fifth, the scientific community itself historically has not uniformly and contiguously agreed on a single interpretation of the world. So there's not one objective outlook, even within the science community. There historically have been multiple different subjective outlooks. It has been a collection of competing cultures, and these cultures have been toppled many times and have even done battle with one another. So sixth, what is our confidence that the current paradigm that we are receiving all of our scientific knowledge in, what's our confidence that it won't be toppled just as every other paradigm throughout history has been? I would suggest that the paradigm that we're currently living in will be toppled. And finally, paradigm selection out of which scientific determinations flow depends on subjective judgment in its selection, and thus science can never be purely rational.
Powerful